For proverbial kitchen and show you what we've been working on. And specifically, I would like to show you the upcoming release of Nuke 16 that we are planning on releasing sort of towards the beginning of next year. And specifically features that will allow you to speed up your workflow using Nuke. So perhaps we can start with a presentation there. But before we do any of that, I would like to actually start by showing you the laptop is not connected, you have it there. Once this comes up, let's give a kudos to all the amazing artists that are using our tools. And I'll show you a little bit of a Foundry showreel. Great. Thank you. Amazing stuff. So, can I see the sea of hands of people who are using Nuke in this room? Awesome. Great. So, yeah. I'm going to preamble this with a little bit of disclaimer. Everything that you're going to see is very much work in progress. The user interface will change, but the overall principles and ideas are already inside of Nuke. So, let's start with a feature that we are quite proud of, and it should allow you to accelerate your workflows. We call it affectionately multi-shot or graph scope variables. For those who are using Katana or are familiar with Katana, this is some of the ideas that are present in Katana are now coming to Nuke as well. So, and it's not only focused on multi-shot, it also will allow you to essentially extrapolate the work across any setups that where the patterns start emerging. So inside of Nuke, to facilitate this, we enabled few new parts of the user interface. Namely, we have the graph scope variable, or the main scope, where you will be able to introduce and add parameters to your scripts. Then we have this is very much work in progress, the global variables that will allow you to actually allow the artist to interact with whatever is being driven by the root variables. And within the node graph, you will be able to see things like variable switch and variable group. So in its most basic, or the basic workflow, let's look at the sort of the basic setup. So I have 3 different states, and this could be potentially 3 different shots that might be coming into Nuke, and I have one variable that I named shot. And that variable can have 3 states. So let's say this is shot 1, 2, and 3. And I would like to start working on them simultaneously. So we introduced the variable switch that will allow you to essentially evaluate based on the state of the shot variable to what data will be pulled. So this is the most basic example that you can create with multi-shot. Essentially, we are creating a smart switch that is listening to the shot variable and changing its state based on that. Now, obviously, overtyping the variables every single time wouldn't be particularly useful. So we also introduce types of variables that you might introduce, things like integer or list. In this case, list would really lend itself quite well to this particular task. So I can have a label called shots and then populate it, whether by hand or programmatically, with the states that I would like to achieve. From there, I can then easily choose which states will be available. Right now, I'm driving the global variables inside of Nuke. So if I would like to, and this is how it actually looks more populated. So, and we'll go a little bit more deep into this. So if I enable, if I essentially enable, and what you can see here is that I have some variables that are talking to the root of the whole project, and they will be applicable to the show or sequence overall. And then I have few variables that are talking to the individual shots themselves. Not only you can introduce the variables on a sort of a global level, you can also introduce the variable on the local level. So to encapsulate whatever is the internal functionality listening to. So I can also have variables that are talking to only a specific group. So what is now being showed is that I have shot variable in the root is say be set to red, but within the other scope, within the group, I have the variable set to blue. So you can really create multiple scopes within individual sequences. Let's say you're running multiple shots simultaneously and need to override certain parameters and create a unique version of this. It doesn't really have to rely on the global scope of the variables. And this can be taken even further. I can have, for example, multiple states of the shot. So here we are doing 3 different shots with 3 different grading options. And I can say within the main thing that whatever grade should be used with a specific set variable, but this can be also overridden within a variable group. So then I can have, for example, a shot. Inside of that, there can be a variable group, and the grade can be set only within the group itself. So when it comes to building of the variables, generally you would start populating this whole thing by adding individual variables that will define the show. So we can see things like, for example, the show name is City Alley, then where the path to the main root footage is, where the played routes are, where the CG routes are, and the rest can be done by essentially reevaluating the variables recursively. So for example, and also by using expressions. So for example, this frame end and frame start can be set by using typical TCL expressions inside of Nuke or Python, and then the played and CG route is using combination of the individual data above to derive whatever needs to be actually generated from within this setup. And now I'm just highlighting them right here. You can also create multiple levels of the variables to encapsulate them and make it more humanly readable. So here I'm defining essentially variables that will be applicable to the show or sequence, and then individual variables that will be applicable only to a specific shot. So every time I switch the state of the script to a specific shot, it will start reading all the properties of the specific shot that is needed, and based on that, it will switch the whole setup. Other things can be driven also just by reading essentially and using specific syntax within the file paths that will allow you to read these properties. So here I'm essentially telling it to use or read plates from the plate variable, whatever the path is, and by switching the actual shot number, it will keep on, or it will take and look into different folders based on the individual values from within the shot. As I mentioned before, the recursive evaluation is also possible. So you can essentially create a combination of multiple variables. So this particular variable will be using the inputs from the color input and combine it with something else, whatever you need to evaluate. So the syntax that we are implementing is the percentage sign. So now my result will essentially match whatever is in the color, and this way you can create much more complex variables and paths and combination of things above. So this is now a little bit of an example of all the fully populated setup for a specific sequence, where we have the root and all the properties within the root. So we have also plates and all the inputs for shot 1, 2, and 3, and so on. You can also use expressions with this, as I hinted previously. And also we are integrated a tool that will allow you to, that can be used also outside of the scope of multishot, and that is a ability to link node. Now, if you link nodes together, if you're using cloning inside of Nuke before, you might be aware that that's not the most efficient way. The linking of the nodes will allow you to create copies of nodes that will work in conjunction together, but then you can override only certain parameters of the node. This is much faster than doing it through expressions. It doesn't require re-evaluation on every frame. This is kind of a set and forget mechanism, but this can be used also for essentially any general compositing purposes quite effectively. So here I have a little bit of a better example where we have two different states and the match move switch is waiting for the shot variable, and the color corrections are connected, are identical between shot 1 and 2, but they need slight adjustments, and I can very easily do that by linking the nodes, and it is much faster. If you need to access any of the properties that are within the drop-downs, that can be also done just by opening the drop-down button, selecting the part that you would like to override for a specific shot, while keeping all the other properties still linked to the master of the node. So in practice, this can look somewhat like this. I have multiple shots with really complex parts of the compositing, and just by changing the individual properties, there is a variable switch that is enabling whole sections of the scripts that should or should not contribute to the final result. You can have mutations of this, so when I set the variable to a specific shot, let's say shot 10, this stream will be evaluated automatically. If I change it to another one, the other contributions will be also included. And this way you can essentially create a setup that can be reused across whole sequences, shots, potentially shows. It's an amazing tool for templating and essentially driving more complex setups from within Nuke. We are also planning to connect this directly to Katana and its multi-shot functionality. From the organization point of view, this can be driven in any way you like, depends on how you work. For example, here I have an example of more encapsulated workflow, where the data is, the groups are all hidden, so the artist is really exposed only to the bits that they need to see and work with, and you can see how the streams of what is being evaluated is being processed as requested. Or you can keep this all open and essentially composite as normal before. This also works with live groups. So all of these parts of setups can be then loaded dynamically from disk if you need to. So this offers quite a few potential use case scenarios how we can optimize your work with this. So, and I guess from the TD and the processing point of view, I think this is also quite exciting, and this is also coming from the Katana side of things. When it comes to actually rendering this, you can set the variables and just submit the script over and over and over just by changing the main properties, let's say for deadline or any other render manager. You don't have to create multiple versions of the comp. You can just tell it what state it should be rendered in without actually accessing or even opening Nuke directly. So this was a brief overview of multi-shot. This is now how it actually could potentially work in the deadline. I'm just essentially wrote a little Python script that submits all of this in one go. So by looping over and generating and submitting the very same script 23 times, I'm now rendering 23 shots that can be completely different from each other, and everything is driven from the main single script or single template. So hopefully this can accelerate your work in meaningful ways. Aside from this, this concludes Content. We are also including a series of updates across the whole application. One of the things that we are quite proud of is enhanced ray tracing for the scanline renderer on the 3D side of things. So now the 3D rendering is not necessarily focused on creating final image. This is a supplemental rendering tool, but now we can do also ray tracing from within it, and anything like refractions, reflections. You can also set maximum ray depth, how far the individual rays will travel. This is an example of refractions in a little bit. And also transmission, ambient occlusion. So say you need to actually integrate some shots or some elements into your scenes. If you use the new updated scanline renderer, I can isolate parts of the 3D scene that are coming directly into Nuke, create a simple environmental sphere, and now I have a windows for that helicopter that can be actually driven by the HDRI sphere within the scene. If I combine it all together, I have a really nice result that actually behaves physically correct, because this is a proper ray tracing. It's not a faked effect on the geometry directly. This is a little example of the refraction as well, or transmission. The updates to Roto are rather simple but meaningful, and it's all about performance. We enabled caching. We are getting excellent results and really seeing major performance boost. This is not trying to illustrate a performance update, but once it's all ready, you'll see that even with hundreds, thousands of shapes, you can really, you won't wait for changing a simple shape. On the machine learning front, we are sort of starting to expand the machine learning capabilities across the application overall. And one of the bits where it really manifests itself is the addition to planar tracker. So what you can now do is essentially use the planar tracker and enable the ML button, and that will assist with the tracks overall. So tracking really complex movements where there is no features practically to speak of, like on the paper there, or the really cool arrival of the purple square from outside of the frame. That all can be achieved with using the new ML-assisted planar tracker inside of Nuke. We also see quite an uptake on the category side of things. So finally, we are seeing people actually creating and releasing pre-trained AI models. And this is not only our category, but also you can find them all around the internet. So for example, Rafael Silva is making amazing tools to anything to create Z-depth, removal, cleanup. All of these are pre-trained category models. And this was sort of our intention from the get-go to, through Copycat, enable people to create and share their own work. There is another really good tool for creating Z-depth, temporally stable Z-depth. So do check it out. Do check out Rafael's website. These are additional really cool use case scenarios. So for example, he created a tool that allows you to drive facial expressions from one footage to another. Yeah, there is quite a lot of interesting bits available. And a little bit on the timeline side of things, especially the more meaningful one, it's the addition of the contact sheet. So Nuke, our timeline-based tool set like Nuke Studio or Hero Player are excellent in the review context that allow you to load up arbitrary footage, have a look, evaluate, leave comments. And to make that workflow even faster and more meaningful, now we have a way to select multiple shots or whole sequences and play them all at once. Not only you can load them in, but you can also filter their timelines based on tags, and just very easily select a few bits. And let's say during the review session, we need to look at all of these shots from a specific artist. You can do that all at once in one unified, really easy way to access all of that information. One of the major complaints about Nuke Studio was the speed of export. I'm happy to report that that is now significantly improved. This is not trying to illustrate the speed overall, but now we are comparable with other tools on the market. So when it comes to generating your outputs, Nuke Studio also allows you to get stuff out much faster. So this was my precious 15 minutes on the stage. We have a booth in the main presentation floor. So if you have any questions about any Foundry tools, please do stop by. And I'm going to leave the floor for the next amazing content.